Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see all of you. Thanks for joining us. I hope the weather is improved wherever you are. Here in New Jersey, it was 65 degrees and sunny this afternoon, so that was like a wonderful thing after all the snow that we got earlier this year. And I can imagine that many of you were probably in the same kind of boat. So anyway, I'm so glad to see all of you, as is always the case. Tonight, our guest is the wonderful Philip Yancey, and really appreciate him taking some time to join us this evening. Hi, Philip.
Hi.
And we're going to talk about interviewing, which I think is like one of the most underappreciated skills and opportunities for all of us. So Philip actually suggested this topic, which I was really glad when he did, because again, it's something that kind of tends to get overlooked. So in any event, what I thought I'd give everyone a chance to introduce themselves if they want to, and I'll try to just go, somewhat down the list. And if you don't want to, that's okay. We'll just, skip over to the next person. But I just thought it would be, helpful for all of you to get to know each other a little bit. So Elizabeth, is it pronounced Hack? Hawk? Elizabeth, are you there?
Looks like she's muted, Brian.
She's muted. Most everyone's muted. So if I call your name and you want to say something, please unmute. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, nice to be here.
How are you?
I've been really looking forward to this. Thank you.
Good. Do you want to just tell us briefly about who you are and what work you do?
I'm retired, but I've done some writing during the past. For a number of years, I did interviews for my church newsletter, and now I'm part of New York Writers Coalition, and we write together every Monday on Zoom, and we've got an open workshop coming up soon. So I've been following along these, and thank you very much for doing this.
Good. Yeah. Well, I know you've been involved with several of the Writing for Your Life events, so I appreciate that. So next up, how about James, Jd Mink? You there?
Yeah. Hey, Brian, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Well, I was just going to say I attended a couple of workshops that Brian had hosted, and I was on the call last month with Diana Butler Bass, and wanted to, as soon as I heard that this was about interviewing, I had a couple of questions in mind and was really excited to join this call tonight.
Good. Well, glad you could make it.
Yep.
Kim, how you doing?
Hi, I'm well, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a writer, pastoral musician, and I'm interested in memoir.
Oh, good. Well, you're in good company. There's a lot of folks that are here, I think, that are in the same boat as you. So welcome.
Thank you.
So Joanne McHugh. Hi, Joanne.
Hello. I work for a small Catholic publishing company, and I am presently looking for a home for my very own little book baby that I wrote for my daughters, called Things Your Mother Should Have Told You. And I have to say how excited I am to be on this call with Philip, just because he's one of my favorite spiritual writers of all time. So I'm just thrilled to be here tonight.
Good. Well, I'm really glad you could join us. So let's see, Judy Homer. Hi, Judy. Judy, can you unmute? Hello, hello. Okay. Oh, there she is. Hi, Judy.
Hi. I attended writing or spiritual writers event held at St. Luke's United Methodist.
Absolutely. Indianapolis.
Yes. Indianapolis. And I'm currently not writing because my computer is on the blink. So, but I'm doing other things at St. Luke's.
Good, good. Well, that was a wonderful conference and a wonderful church.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah, I have fond memories of that. And someday when all of this pandemic is over, I want to try to get back to Indianapolis.
Well, and I actually led a workshop on Barbara Brown's Holy Envy.
Oh, good.
Yes. Well attended.
Well, good.
So.
I'm glad to hear.
Okay.
Okay, next up is Karen. Karen Moritz. How are you, Karen?
Trying to unmute. Doing okay. Today in Nebraska, it was in the 70s. It was amazing because we had like minus 27 degrees temperature, not wind chill in like February. Yeah, it's been a pretty brutal winter here in Nebraska. So I'm pretty excited. I sat outside and had a glass of wine and it was a lovely thing.
Oh, that's good. That's got to feel like spring.
Oh, it was wonderful. Of course, by the weekend, it's supposed to get back down in the 40s, but I'll just take every wonderful day we get. I'm a pastor at a First Christian Church here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and actually a Presbyterian. They let me be an interloper, so that's kind of fun. And I do a lot of writing for my ministry, of course. And then thanks, Brian, for the lead about the guidepost devotional. I sent in 2 of them. I'm still waiting to hear. I'm on pins and needles, hoping. I thought I put together a couple really interesting animal devotionals for them. So we'll see.
Good.
But the guy was really nice. John was very nice when I submitted them, and he said, "Oh, I look forward to reading them. I'll let you know." So I'm waiting. But I appreciated the lead on your
Sure. I mean,
all that was really cool.
I've recently engaged even more with guideposts than what had been the past. It's been gradually increasing, and I talked to someone else there who's going to try to increase the degree of collaboration, and I said, let us know anytime there's a call for submissions like that, because it's like, I know that all the folks that subscribe to Writing for Your Life would be interested in that. So
it's great, and I really appreciate that lead, and have been to a few of your online and in-person events. At my alma mater at Princeton, of course, was the first one I went to.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
wonderful. Philip was there with us one year.
Mm-hmm. It was really neat. And then I did a couple of the online things last year. Are you still going to Italy, by the by?
No.
Yeah, I wondered.
No, we kept having to postpone it, and I just said, forget it.
Maybe next year. I'm trying to plan a sabbatical, so maybe we'll work that in the next year.
I haven't said this to anybody publicly yet, but so keep your fingers crossed. I'm working on maybe at some point getting to Costa Rica with Lori Erickson.
Oh, I've been there. It's beautiful. Costa Rica is beautiful.
I've never been there, and I don't know how much you all know Lori Erickson. She's spoken at a couple of my different conferences, and she's basically a travel person. So Spiritual Travels is her website, and she's curated the Faith and Travels section of the Compassionate Christianity website.
Oh, okay.
And so we'll see. I mean,
Well,
it won't be till probably like 2023.
I have some leads for in the Czech Republic. It's where I lived for 6 years before, so, and helped with things like that. So
yeah. So anyway, stay tuned.
I'm sorry I missed you the last 2 months. I had to help a friend move to a care center, and a bunch of other crazy stuff has been happening.
No worries. No worries. I'm glad you could join us.
Yeah. Yes. So thanks.
So Mimi. Hi, Mimi. Can you unmute?
There we go.
Hey, how are you?
I'm really great, Brian. And it's nice to see you again. And Philip, I've read some of your books. And are you still in the lovely state of Colorado?
I am. And I hate to say this, is it Karen who's in Nebraska? But we're told we're going to get 5 feet of snow this weekend. So watch out.
The reason I brought that up, I was living in Colorado for quite a while before I moved back to Virginia. But going back to Brian's question, I have a Master of Theological Studies from ILIF, but I'm also a nurse. And what I'm doing right now with my writing, which is going to be a long-range project for memoir and devotionals, but I am working on my platform. And I'm creating a Zoom meeting, and if anybody's interested, on March 30th, it's a Saturday at 3 p.m. East Coast time, but I have people that have signed up across the United States. And my platform is Julian of Norwich and the Black Plague, because she lived through the whole, there were 3 plagues in the Black Plague. And it's not just going to be her theology. It's more like a mini retreat. You know, this is not going to be academic discussion. I put that out there because I've given retreats and sometimes people want to get bogged down on the details, but I want people to reflect how the pandemic, where is God's revelation to you during this pandemic? Because she had all these revelations.
So when is that, Mimi?
Saturday, March 30th.
Can you send me an email
Sure.
with the information, and I'll post it to the social media, and
March
let people
30th
know
is
about
not
it.
a Saturday. It's not a Saturday. March 30th is like a Tuesday.
I mean, I'm sorry, it's March 20th.
Sorry,
March
I just
20th.
know all the Sundays from church work. So
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you. I'm just kind of zooming ahead. Yeah, so it's March the 20th, 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, please send me an email, and
Okay, that's
with
great.
a little blurb, and if you've got a web page that you can point people to, that'd be awesome.
I don't have a webinar. I have the meeting coming up, but I don't have like my website yet. You know, this is something in process.
Well,
But
whatever, just let people know how they can join. You know,
that would be great. They
Yeah,
have to be invited because it's going to be through Zoom.
okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Next up, Patrice. Hi, Patrice.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'll turn on my camera. I apologize in advance. It's this light behind me, but I am a writer, and what I'm working on this year is mastering self-publishing and building my platform and just doing some other things that I've been wanting to do for quite some time. Yeah, that's it. And I'm here in Washington, D.C. Believe it or not, I have not been outside I did go out. I took the trash out. So the weather was fine. So no complaints with that.
Good. All right, let's see. Rebecca.
Hi. Hi. I'm Rebecca. This is my husband, Praveen. I live in Ithaca, New York, and I am writing middle grade fiction. I actually just found out about you guys because I just read Sarah Arthur's book on Madeleine L'Engle and kind of followed all that information. And so I'm currently interviewing my 85-year-old dad for some information to blend into a book for kids, middle B fiction, but kind of blending that in. So I'm curious about what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent. Well, glad you could join us.
Thanks.
So let's see. Sabrina. Hi, Sabrina.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you all. Good evening. I am actually an assistant professor of public health. I am here in southeastern North Carolina. So I am also a qualitative researcher, so I write a lot of stories, but mainly around health and health histories and stigma related to health. So that's sort of what I do professionally, but I also manage a blog that I've had for about 9 years now, and I'm venturing out into more freelance writing, including curating a page for Compassionate Christianity on faith and health. So I'm excited to be here and just hear what you have to say. Great to see you, Philip.
Thanks. And so Sabrina's like really active on social media, and I really appreciate her support on that. So thank you very much for that, Sabrina.
Thank you, Brian.
And Shar, how are you? Welcome back.
Hi, Brian and everyone. You all seem so impressive. So it's nice to be here with you. Thank you, Philip, for joining us, and Brian for setting it up. I'm a teacher, a high school teacher, science teacher, also a writer. And so I'm working on a lot of rejections right now. So I'm doing pretty good. A lot of success at that. And working on a young adult novel.
Well, good. Well, as everyone here will attest, rejection is like the main part of the program.
Yeah.
And for those of you that have heard me talk about independent publishing, I mean, there is a wonderful plan B. You know what I mean? If you don't get a traditional publisher. So, anytime you want to talk with me more about that, just shoot me an email, and I'm glad to, discuss that with you.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. I think someone just joined us, Nancy Conant. Nancy, we were just going around and briefly introducing ourselves. So if you'd like to unmute and let us know who you are, that'd be awesome. Nancy, can you unmute?
I don't see her square, Brian. I don't know if it's
she's
not
there.
coming. It's okay.
There we go. I was
There.
having a hard time unmuting. Hi, everybody. Nancy Conant here. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I just stumbled across the opportunity to join this, and I love Philip Yancey's work. So I read The Gift of Pain with Dr. Paul Brand and with Philip Yancey, and just really loved it. And so just jumping in to hear what he has to say.
Well, good. I'm really glad that you found us and glad you joined us.
Thank you.
So as everyone knows, Philip is our guest author, and I really appreciate him joining us. All of you I know who he is. So I'm not going to do a long, laborious introduction, but Philip, you want to say a few words to get started?
Yes. You mentioned independent publishing, and I've been learning that whole field too. And I got rejection letters. I thought I had this great idea. When the pandemic hit, I had a lot of travel that was canceled, so I had extra time. And 40 years ago, I was enamored with the book Devotions Upon Emergent Occasions by John Donne. John Donne lived through the Black Death. In his wave, it was in 1623. He was the dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, and he was the spokesman for God, the greatest spokesman in London, the largest church. And then he got sick, and he was lying there ill. Everybody thought he had bubonic plague. Yeah, there you go, Brian. There's a reason.
Yeah, this is what he's talking about.
And
wonderful.
And I started giving that book away. We read it in high school English. Maybe they still do. No man is an island. Ask not for whom the bell tolls. Some of these famous quotes. And as I read it, it was so contemporary in terms of a person wrestling with God. But there was a lot of weird stuff in there. The medicine, the science was very strange. They treated him with bloodlettings and applying pigeons to his mouth to suck away the evil vapors and stuff like that. So I would give it to people and say, this is great stuff. And they would try it, and I'd ask them later, and how far did you get? Oh, first page. The language was a barrier. So I decided to do a Eugene Peterson style upgrade of John Donne, because it's as old as the King James Bible, and to cut out all the stuff that doesn't apply in the 21st century, and then to simplify sentences. One of his sentences was 234 words.
Oh my goodness.
And people just they don't do that anymore. So I did a modern paraphrase of the whole thing. It took me several months this summer, and I could not get a traditional publisher interested. So I went on that independent publishing route, and it's a lot of work, Brian.
Sorry.
I wish I had called you earlier because there are a lot of steps, but part of it is just figuring out how the whole thing works, and Library of Congress and who you're going to work with, and whether it's, Ingram Spark, or how do you get onto Amazon. There's all that stuff. Just, it's a whole new field. But the great thing is I got all these rejections, and my response was, I'll show them. I'll do my own. And we all have that option now. That's an option that didn't exist 20 years ago, my goodness, or 30 years ago.
Respectfully, you're Philip Yancey. You really can show them, but I'm not sure you can.
Well, or I make completely bomb. Who knows? Doesn't matter. But at least I've got it for my relatives and friends. So that's part
Well, I mean, for what it's worth, when I worked for the Frederick Buechner's family, we self-published, independent published one of his books, on Amazon CreateSpace at that time, and it turned out great.
Which one was that, Brian?
Buechner 101. It's kind of introduction to Frederick Buechner. So if you go to frederickbuechner.com, you can see that as one of the books. But also, more salient to the point, there's a partner of mine that his name is Adam Thomas, and on the Writer Services page of the Writing for Your Life website, there's a list of a bunch of folks who I partner with to do editing and all kinds of things. And one of the things that Adam does is like book cover design and interior layout, and just helps people navigate self-publishing.
Yeah.
And
I worked with one of those local companies, kind of a hybrid deal. So
okay.
It really helps to have somebody hold your hand who's been through the whole process before.
Exactly. And for those, some of you already know this, but just a quick aside, I'm working on a self-published book that I'm not writing. I've recruited about 30 people to write chapters for this book. It's called How to Heal Our Divides. And it's about, a bunch of organizations and people who are doing very tangible, practical things of healing racial divides, political divides, religious divides, things like that. And in order to get it out really quickly, we're independent publishing it. And so hopefully that will show up in the May, June timeframe. So stay tuned on that. But anyway, so thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And, as I mentioned, our topic is about the art of interviewing. And Philip, I'd love for you to kind of kick us off and just share some of your thoughts about that topic.
I'll start with a question. How many of you watched Oprah Winfrey interviewing Harry and Meghan the other night? Only two? I thought the entire...
I watched it.
Some of you I'm not seeing. Okay, all right. I thought the entire country would be watching it. But anyway, I'll refer back to that because Oprah is a great interviewer, and she was in a really tricky, explosive field to be. It's still coming out how the royal family is reacting. I went on BBC News, and it is big, big news over there. I jotted down over the years. I've interviewed an awful lot of people. I started as a magazine editor and writer at Campus Life magazine. And those were young people. And the interviews went like this. I was kind of shy, socially backward, came from a weird family situation. And suddenly I'm out there interviewing these kids. Usually it was set up by somebody who said, this kid has a great story. This kid got attacked by a grizzly bear. Oh, okay. And so here I am, shy, don't know how to have a conversation, and I'm put down with this 16-year-old pimply young man with a scar on his face, and I say, tell me about your story. Got attacked by a bear. Well, like, how did it happen? I don't know, I was just walking down the trail. Well, what trail? Well, we were in Yellowstone National Park. Well, and then I realized I had to fill in the blanks. It really helped me just learn how to have a conversation with people. I wasn't very good at it, and I had to kind of project, and it was almost like a true false thing. Was the sun shining or not shining? Was it raining or not raining? Was it snowing or not snowing? How big was the bear? Was it a grizzly bear or a black bear? Was it actually black? Because some black bears are brown and golden. And so that's one style of interviewing I learned. And it was good for me because in a sense I was writing fiction because I was coming up with the details and they were either saying yes or no, yes or no. That's one style. Then later I did a lot of articles for Christianity Today, and those were of two types. Some were very content-filled people, and I was to get from them what they're an expert in. So I wrote one book that was based largely on interviews, and that's the book Soul Survivor. And it includes some of those further embellished articles that I did for Christianity Today. People like Annie Dillard and Robert Coles and Paul Brand, Surgeon General C. Everett Koop, people like that. And so those are content people. And then the third category I would say would be celebrities, and they're just really famous people. And they may have good content, but you can't treat them like the other kind of people because they're so used to being interviewed. It's tricky. So the teenagers, anybody would do well with that because the teenagers are so backward and so shy and so just unconfident that anybody paying attention to them who's skilled can draw them out and make them feel pretty good. And your job is just to mine the data and make them feel comfortable enough to talk to you. The content people are probably my favorite kind of interview because, well, for example, right now, I would love to interview Francis Collins or Tony Fauci. I've just listened to several interviews by them. They have great content. And I love scientists because they're so enthusiastic about one small thing. Science is huge, but a scientist is just one tiny little slice that they're an expert in. And what I like to do is get them out of a desk situation, out of an office, get them out in the field if they're a biologist or a naturalist, or get Dr. Fauci in an ICU unit somewhere, or get Francis Collins playing the guitar, which he always does. Something. Two talking heads. That's tough. You don't see that a lot on television. You don't have usually an hour show of two heads talking to each other. For that kind of media, you need action, you need drama, you need engagement. And one way I've learned to do it is to try to put them in a context, not just sitting in a coffee shop, for sure not sitting in their office, because then they're in charge. You kind of want to bring them out of that comfortable setting because then new things show up. Celebrities are different. And I've actually interviewed two presidents, President Clinton and President Carter, when they were in, Carter after he left office, but Clinton when he was in office. And Bono, some real celebrities. And that John Updike, a well-known author, and that it's scary. You have to be really careful. And the only way I know to do that is to prepare as much as possible. Boy, when I interviewed John Updike, who I admired a lot as a writer, he had a book of, I think, 200 different interviews. And I read all 200 of those. I'm looking for questions he hadn't been asked yet. It was hard after 200 interviews. But the problem is they're so used to being interviewed, they're going to give you a canned answer. And you got to get them off of that canned answer. And that's why I was so impressed with how Oprah handled that last night, because these are celebrities and or Sunday night, they're celebrities who are used to being interviewed. And politicians especially are very used to dodging the question and coming up with whatever they want you to report about them. They often don't give an authentic answer. And if you show any kind of adversary adversarial stance, the defenses go up and they clam up, or they give you that armor, that you can't get past. And so whenever I'm bringing something that's controversial or that they may get a little upset about, and Oprah did this the other night, I don't say, wait a minute, you told me a minute ago, blah, 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 so that immediately I'm kind of in an adversary situation. I always quote somebody else. I would say, well, we all know about the British press, how terrible they are. And they keep harping on you, Megan, about this. So how do you handle that? How do you respond? And by doing that, it lowers the barrier so that I'm not on one side and they're not on the other side. There was a very interesting book, I think I wrote the name of it, Fatal Vision. Fatal Vision was the story of a man named Joe McGinnis, who was a very respected colonel. He was a physician in the Army. And his family was slaughtered in almost like a Charles Manson situation. Somebody came in with a knife, killed his wife and I think a couple of children, painted blood on the wall, did this terrible stuff. And he was arrested for murder. And nobody could believe it because he had no history of any wrongdoing. He's a colonel. He had great respect in the community. And he was put in jail, and he wanted to tell his side of the story. He thought he was wrongly accused. So this New Yorker writer named Janet Malcolm thought, well, here's a great story, got a lot of drama. And she went out numerous times and interviewed him and wrote a book about it. But to his shock, in the process of interviewing him, she became convinced he was guilty. The evidence was very sketchy, and he didn't believe there was a chance in the world. So she obviously didn't show him the manuscript in advance. So he gets his book out that he thinks is going to exonerate him, but actually it is one more nail in the coffin. And he sues the publisher, he sues her from prison, and finally they settle out of court. And when Janet Malcolm reflects on that, she says, when you're interviewing, you're the supportive, forgiving, grace-filled mother. Oh, I'm so sorry. I can't believe people did that to you. Oh, how did that feel? And you've been sitting in this prison all this time. I can't believe it. How could this happen? And then when you do that, he trusts you and he kind of opens up. But when you get back to your typewriter or your computer, you become the objective, justice-seeking, stern father. and she wrote what she believed to be true, but it just completely blindsided him because it was opposite of what he expected. So that's something to keep in mind. And I've run into some situations like that where, the kinder, my job is to get people to talk. My job is to get more details that nobody else has come up with before. And there are very, very few times can you do that by kind of charging in with a hostile position. I use kind of what I call the Columbo approach. So I do a lot of research in advance, but I don't let them know that I know anything about them. I start with this kind of naive expression. Tell me about the COVID-19 virus, Dr. Fauci. I don't know much about viruses. Tell me about it. And then gradually kind of work my way in. And I don't know if you've seen Columbo, was famous 20, 30 years ago. And he was like that. He's kind of a bumbling investigator, but he kind of figured things out as he's talking to the person, but he didn't let them know that. And he'd walk to the door and put his hand on the doorknob and open the door to say goodbye. And say, there's just one thing that I can't figure out. I'm sure you have an explanation for this, but you said it was on Friday. And actually, I read in a police report that it was Sunday, and he solved the case, but he didn't let the person he's interviewing know it, obviously. So those are the three areas, the kind of fill in the blank style of interviewing, and then the organize great content. And there, my key, I'm going to somebody who knows a lot more about a field than I do. That's why I'm interviewing them rather than vice versa. And my job is to represent the reader. If a magazine hired me to do an article on how to assemble a nuclear weapon, I know nothing about how to assemble a nuclear weapon. But I've been in situations like that as a journalist where my job is to find somebody who can tell me how to do that. and not in a way, it takes an unusual person that can explain it in a way that makes sense to the rest of the world. And that's my job. I'm the representative of the average reader who is just as naive and ignorant as I am, but I'm trying to find out something that will help me understand what I'm doing. And then the celebrity thing, what I'm trying to do is to come up with a new angle to portray that person for my audience in a different way. For example, when I was asked to interview Bill Clinton, it was actually initiated by the White House. Shortly after he was in office, he did a couple things that angered evangelicals. He got a lot of evangelicals who voted for him. Politics were different back then. Evangelicals often voted for Democratic candidates. I guess that's not so true anymore, but it was true back then. And then he did some things quickly that alienated them. And so the White House contacted Christianity Today, and they wanted, well, I had done an article about, it doesn't matter. I did an article that said Bill Clinton is not the Antichrist. And Al Gore found it, put it on his desk and said, hey, Bill, you got to start somewhere. So then they contacted me and said, could you do a profile of the president to kind of explain some of these things that evangelicals are upset about, abortion and some gender issues. And so I did. And you got to be really careful when you're interviewing the president. I had to record it. You can't fill in the blanks with him. It's got to be accurate. And how do you get somebody that skilled to give you new information that's not just a soundbite propaganda piece? That's a trick. There are different kinds of celebrities. I've also interviewed sports celebrities, and they're almost like the fill in the blank. Many of them, they don't have much content. There are exceptions, of course. But if you read Sports Illustrated, I think Sports Illustrated does one of the best jobs of any magazine in interviewing and in profiling people who don't have a lot of substance, but they make a fascinating article that grips you and you read all the way through it. So those are kind of my three categories, and I'm happy to talk any more detail or tell you war stories or hear your war stories or answer any questions.
Yeah, there's so many different dimensions to this, and so I want to, start exploring some of these. But please, everyone who's on, feel free to ask a question, unmute, your microphone and ask a question at any point in time. But I'll start off by switching the seats for a moment. You talked a lot, Philip, about, the skills that you employed when you were doing the interviewing. But you've been interviewed yourself quite a few times, including at least once by me, I think more than that. But what, from your perspective, makes a good interviewer?
Somebody who comes up with something nobody has asked me before. That's what I really like. And someone who demonstrates to me that they've mastered the material. Often my interviews will come after a new book comes out, and I'll do podcasts or something like that. Very often it's clear right away that they may have glanced at the preface or something, but they surely haven't read the book. And then they're forfeiting their power because they don't have any power at that point. It's all in my court. So I can say anything I want, And it's kind of disrespectful in a way. I would never interview somebody like that. I really want to master the material.
So preparation is really key.
Yeah, preparation for sure. Mm-hmm. And the way, the winsome way they can let you know that is by saying, before we get started here, I just want to let you know that that story in chapter 12 that you told, boy, that really got to me. That was great. Thank you for that. And everybody likes strokes. That feels good, and it kind of puts you on their side, and it lets you know at least they read chapter 12.
Yeah. So one of the things that when I'm working with authors, particularly around platform building, is that I highly recommend, that they do interviews with other authors or other experts kind of in their field, whatever their area of focus is. And I do that myself, obviously, a lot. And for me, it represents a real win-win, because it's an opportunity for the author to share more about their work, to an audience that either isn't familiar with them as much or, doesn't know that kind of depth. And then it's a win for me because I get content, interesting people that I'm talking to and interesting things that we're learning about them. So I have just found it to be, one of those situations where it's just really valuable for both parties. And I'd really like to hear other people's views on that. What kind of value or aspects of interviews have you found to be most important? Do anybody want to take a shot at that?
I'll try. I think I understood the question, but I think for me, what I liked about the interview that Oprah Winfrey did on, was it Sunday or Monday, the days of blurred. I just like the way she allows us to see the humanity of everyone she interviews. And I think that's just her having compassion for human beings in general. Like, you can tell when the person is doing the interviewing whether or not they actually want a person to win as a human being, even if they don't agree with what they've done, even if they just think the person is full of whatever. It's just this way that she always does that, that I appreciate when anyone is doing the interviewing.
Well, she got a ton of kudos for that. Just as Philip was mentioning, I've read, several different articles or blurbs or whatever about people's respect for what she pulled off there. But that's a really good point, Patrice. Try to show a person's humanity. I mean, regardless of what the content is, that you're talking about.
I want to follow up on something, not so much what Patrice said, but relating to Oprah. In the beginning of the interview, Oprah mentioned that, and Oprah's really big on this, and it's one of her own principles, to look at your own motives and, trying to think, for the interview. What's your intent? She always looks at intention in herself and sees, is it going to match up with the people that she's going to interview? And of course, she did that with Harry and Meghan. We weren't privy to that, but it's a way she does her ethics in her business. Or somehow they can negotiate and straddle the intentions there. And it's such a really good spiritual practice question, is the way I look at that. What is your intention in this? What is my intention in this? How can we come together in this? And that's a huge bridge in itself. So I think in an interview, that would be part of the preparation and how to word that prior to an interview. I'd like, comments on that.
Yeah. Mimi, I wrote an article on the divide that Brian's talking about. I think Brian read that. And it describes some people who have been able to converse across the divide. There's one gentleman whose name just slipped my mind, Darrell Clark, I forget, who he's an African-American boogie woogie pianist. He played with Jerry Lee Lewis, all these guys, a big man who started going to KKK rallies, Ku Klux Klan rallies.
Yeah.
Very brave man. Do you remember his name, Brian?
No, I don't, but I remember you writing about him.
Yeah. And he talked about starting with dignity and respect for the opponent.
Yeah.
And I think we all need that. Basically, our job in having a good conversation should be not you are wrong and I am right, but let me see if I can explain back to you why you believe the way you do, even though it's not an opinion I share. If I can do that successfully, then communication, two-way communication starts. Mm-hmm. And very often in an interview situation, when I look at it, my job is not to portray my opinion about this person. My job is to portray this person in a way that the reader can make up their own mind. Yes. That's how I treat them with dignity. Yeah. And the only way to do that is to try to put myself in their footsteps, as hard as that may be, and express some sort of rationale that can make sense, that I can put out there in a civil way. Because there are going to be issues. There are issues on which we disagree. And as a nation, we're not doing a very good job of disagreeing with each other. We quickly revert to the hostility and the adversarial stance, which gets nowhere. So I think that can be a way, and I think Oprah demonstrated that. She had great respect and she created a safe place for them to tell the truth.
Yes.
I think that's one thing that we should try to do in interviewing. And that takes trust. And of course, I guess she and Megan have known each other for a long time. So they started with a platform of trust.
There's something else about this. Neither Oprah or Meghan and Harry were in their own homes. Mm-hmm. They were in a neighbor's home. It was a great setting, but they had a neutral areas. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the idea of taking people out of their natural environment. Mm-hmm. I had an idea for an article, and it's probably God protected me from doing this article, but this was about 40 years ago. There were 3 men who were doing more for world hunger than maybe anybody in the world. They were heads of Christian organizations, World Vision, World Relief, big organizations, Food for the Hungry. And they were all really obese.
Oh, God.
And I had this idea of inviting these guys to dinner at a very nice restaurant and describing exactly, what they ordered and talking about food and all that. And then, okay, tell me about the famine going on in Somalia right now and your work. Oh yeah, we got 1,300 people over there and they're feeding. And I, not just to be mean, but because that's the crazy world we live in. They truly were doing more for world hunger than anybody in the world. But that oxymoron situation, there's a great article by the poet, I think, is it Elizabeth Bishop, who was a boxing fan of all things. And I think it was George Plimpton who got Elizabeth Bishop, this frail, tiny little poet, and Muhammad Ali to have dinner together. And Muhammad Ali comes in with his coterie, you know, with his bodyguards and everything. And of course, everybody recognizes him, and he plays to the crowd and he sits down. He says, "Now, who are you?" I'm a poet. "Oh, great. Let's write a poem together. Okay, you come up with the first line." And just, it was just the most fascinating article, the juxtaposition of those two people. And I just love that kind of active journalism, because sometimes the problem is when you're doing interviewing, you need to have some sort of action. Two people talking, that's not action. Annie Dillard wrote a beautiful little book, very small book, called Encounters with Chinese Writers. And it was right when China was opening up, right after Richard Nixon went there in 1980, whenever it was. And so she and a group of Pulitzer Prize winning type writers went over to acquaint Chinese people with what they should be reading from the West, which is a pretty tough assignment, actually. And they're sitting around in meetings. But when she writes about it, they're not just sitting around in meetings. She's looking out the window at this woman squatting down with a toothbrush, cleaning the concrete steps. You know, this is China before the capitalism hit. It was still like medieval China. And she keeps kind of jumping out of the room and taking her action from the setting around her, which is an important trick. I learned that. Describe the clock ticking. Describe what you did last night, how this guy's nodding off because you saw him drinking late at night. You know, whatever happened, bring that into the scene. You have to create a scene if you're doing even something based on two people talking. There's got to be some action going on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I was gonna throw in springboarding off what you guys have said, that I think as an interviewer, if you're gonna have integrity and really let their voice speak, and then I think you'd have to hold what's the story that you're imagining writing about pretty loosely, because I think the idea of going in with the angle or with the story is in itself removing some of the dignity of that person. And there's this risk as writers that we want to have something big to say. We want to have a big item. We want to have the blurb about Harry and Meghan that gets put on the 2-minute clips. You know what I mean? Those really big things. But those really big things are specially chosen not to be accurately representing the whole, but to like draw people in. And I think there's a like an integrity issue about, or if there isn't a big story, what then? Do we create a big story out of it to make our article move forward, or do we realize that it's the story didn't take the shape, as big a shape as we thought it might?
I'm thinking through different books I've read that faced that. One book that I would recommend to you, I think it's still in print, it's been out a couple decades, is a book called Yellow Wind by an Israeli journalist, a very fine writer. And he goes to a Palestinian refugee camp. And he's invited in because Palestinians and Middle Easterners have a great respect for hospitality. And they don't know that he was actually in the Israeli army. Every adult is in the Israeli army, reserves at least. And he had served. He had burst into tents before, kicked people around, held them at gunpoint. You know, that's part of what they do. But now he's a journalist and he's going to interview them. And so he sits down and he sees the little Palestinian boy playing with a gun, playing with a little toy gun, and he realizes he's going to grow up and be an anti-Israeli type terrorist. And there, the activity was going on inside the writer. So he went looking for a story in the tent, but the real story was going on inside him. And in fact, as he's there, hearing the Palestinian point of view, he realizes they are the new diaspora. You know, for most of history, the Jews have been chased away. They have no country. They're just floating out there, being kicked out of Spain, killed in Germany, whatever. And finally, they have their own country. But now the Palestinians are just like that. They're kicked out of Israel. They're living in UN tents and have been for 60 years. And it was a very powerful thing because the motion, as it were, was an internal motion in the author, who was an Israeli soldier and who loves his country. And that's the dynamic that made the book work.
I like that. It says to me that if we hold the story loose, that we will find the story, but it doesn't have to be the story that we went in hoping to tell. It can take a shape we didn't predict.
Right. And actually, in the book by Annie Dillard, Encounters with Chinese Writers, I know some of her books are kind of hard to follow. This one is not. It's very easy. It's just journalism, because she's describing this trip that she went on to China. And the question, what books from America should we be giving to Chinese writers? And she's thinking, let's see, Lolita, probably not. And she goes through, a whole series of books. And everything she comes up with is so decadent. And this is a country that's just now giving birth. It's just now opening up to the rest of the world. They want to know what's important in the rest of the world. And when she looks at what we have to offer, it's pretty bleak, And in a sense, that was the message. It's a self-confession kind of message, because she is an American writer.
Wow.
I wanted to offer a technique that I'm not sure if it works in every setting, but when I was full-time in communication, I did a lot of interviewing of volunteers, of children, of pretty much everyone. And this is something I stumbled upon when I had to interview children. I automatically brought in crayons and all this stuff, like pipe cleaners, to get them like settled down and to just talk. And I just happened to one day leave that stuff out when I was interviewing a volunteer and her student, and the volunteer just picked up the pipe cleaners and started making stuff. And I just noticed that she was most forthcoming when she was focusing on that task. And so I actually took that into the workplace when I was dealing with my coworkers. They would always know when we had a brainstorming session, because I would have pipe cleaners, crayons, and food. But sometimes you don't have the ability to go off site, but you can just use simple things that would get people just talking and comfortable and not so focused on questions, but just having a conversation. So I don't know if Mr. Yancey has done anything like that, but that's just what I'm offering from my experiences in communication.
Yes, I'm 100% in favor of that. And as you're talking, I just remembered a book that I learned a lot from, John McPhee. He's still living. He's a great writer. He's worked for the New Yorker for probably 50 years. And I think he teaches at Princeton as well. One of you is from Princeton. Anyway, he wrote a book called Encounters with the Arch Druid. And it's on the environmental movement. So there are two main characters in the book. One is a man named David Brower. David Brower has, I think I've got these names correct. Anyway, we'll call him David. He was in charge of the Bureau of Land Management, and he built more dams in the United States than anyone in history. And he's a garrulous cowboy, wears a cowboy hat, and just loves to sit around a fire, roasting a rabbit he just shot and telling cowboy stories. And I may have the names mixed up, but the other character in the story was the head of the Sierra Club, who is against any dams, and is this kind of squirrely little nerdy egghead guy. But he has climbed every mountain in the United States over 14,000 feet, including Mount McKinley, Denali. So he's no pushover. And John McPhee has the brilliant idea of putting those two together in a boat and going down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Encounters with the Archdruid. And so there are other people in the boat. And the cowboy guy wins them all over. He's just fascinating. You just love this guy. He knows how to relate to people, full of stories. And he'll be telling stories about, oh, look at this rock formation. Look at that rock formation. Oh man, And David and the other guy, the Sierra Club guy, will just sit back and say, and if he had had his way, we would be under 75 feet of water right now. He was trying to put a dam 2 miles down the road. And that was the juxtaposition. And what the wonderful thing is, it was like reading a novel of the Wild West, because he was dealing with the issues, but not in a direct way, in an indirect way. The narrative carried the interest, and the issues kind of snuck into you, and you didn't know what to think about them, which was John McPhee's point. They're not so simple. Dams can be helpful. And yet, if there had been a dam approved here, the Grand Canyon would be gone, So I love just getting people out of their safe context and putting them in something that stretches them and that tests their own core beliefs. I think that's important.
JD, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so my question is a little more foundational in terms of interviewing. So you talked about the content interviews for what you've done with Christianity Today. So if you're just starting and, you're not affiliated with the publication, what do you do to get an interview is really basically my question. So, in terms of, not being able to say, I'm affiliated with, hi, I'm writing for Christianity Today or this publication or that, or, if you're simply looking to write an article to submit to a publication, how would you go about getting someone's time?
I've been in that situation before, and the best thing you can do is stroke their ego and let them know that you were truly affected by and challenged by their content. And yet you've talked to several friends and they had never heard of this person, and you want to make them known in places they aren't known before. And it's amazing how people are susceptible to having their ego stroked.
Okay.
The other thing I would suggest, JD, and this takes a little bit more time, but don't wait on Christianity Today or whoever the target is to allow you to start doing interviews. Start doing them on your own. And start with people that are more like your peers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that it's more of a, like I was talking about before, of a win-win, kind of a situation, which will do a couple of different things. One is that it gives you practice, and what kinds of things, what kind work and don't work. It gives you a track record, so that if someone from Christianity Today or wherever, wants to check out, okay, what has this guy actually done? What kind of interviews he does? What is he like? How good is he? Et cetera, et cetera. Now you've got some proof points, of people that you've interviewed. And you can, send them a link to the ones you think are the best or whatever.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Because I'm not even talking about, some of the celebrity interviews like we talked about tonight, but just in terms of good content.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I like I was mentioning before, I mean, I just think that interviews are really, really great source of content. You don't have to rely on yourself to think of all the good ideas, right? That your audience may want to hear about. None of us have got all the good ideas, right? So this is Roxy, by the way. She said hello.
And you're providing that kind of extra dimension that we need, the little motion, the narrative.
She's a good girl. Yeah.
We would be writing about your dog if I was interviewing you, Ryan. But, one group of people who will almost always give you an interview are college professors who are an expert in something because they just don't get any attention. And they hang around these kids who really don't care about their subjects by and large. And these poor professors, they study like crazy and they really are experts in one little area. And it could be theology, if you're interested in that, it could be science or whatever, but they'll almost always cooperate.
That's good to keep in mind.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Pastors are harder because there are a lot of people
that I interview. How little they get asked to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're somebody like Philip Yancey, you get asked, obviously, everybody wants to interview him, but a lot of folks, that you might think would get interviewed a lot are really appreciative when I ask them to do a book launch interview or whatever. So,
yeah.
Well,
for example, today in the mail, I got this book, which is a biography of Eugene Peterson. A Burning in My Bones by Wynne Collier. Okay, we can't interview Eugene, but I'd like to interview Wynne Collier. He's a pastor. What was the process of finding out? He interviewed obviously people in Eugene's family, his close friends. You mentioned Sarah Arthur. I think she's in here. I'm in here. That would be a great story. And he would probably be tickled pink for somebody to call up and say, I'd like to talk to you about you and how you were affected by this saga. It'd be a great article.
That's a great example.
Did one of you say pastors are harder?
Yeah, I wanted to know what you meant by that.
They're harder because there are so many demands on their time.
Oh, okay.
There are a lot of people, who need counseling, especially if they're in a larger church with 4 or 5 staff or even more. It's a tough job because they have a kind of an executive role as well as a pastoral role and a counseling role and funerals and weddings and all that. And
but in smaller churches,
college professors don't have that. They have a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, us pastors of smaller churches probably have lots of time.
Great.
But one thing I was wondering, listening to you, I've been sort of mulling around this idea of doing, we have this women's edition magazine in Lincoln, and I was thinking about pitching an idea to do some interviews because now so many of the pastors of our kind of downtown churches, we're all women. And a couple of the churches are pretty big, and they're the women we're heads of staff, and it's really unusual. So if one were to do something like that, is that a thing where you need to kind of have the same questions that you would ask each person, or how would you approach a kind of say you did 3 or 5 different people for a series?
I personally would not think of asking the same questions. I would want different angles for each one because people are different, and that could get a little boring to me to ask the same questions and just compare answers. I try to find a new angle each time.
I just find it kind of an interesting shift in some of our times that's it happened, and I kicked myself a little bit that I didn't do it sooner because we even had a woman rabbi for a time serving here, and it's just unusual to have so many of our mainline churches with women heads of staff, and it's really intriguing to me that it's happened kind of all at the same time. So yeah,
I'd like to read that. That's a good idea.
Well, I know we're way past 9 o'clock Eastern time, so I think we probably ought to wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It was really great to see everyone and great to, talk about what, again, I think is an important but underappreciated topic. And Mimi, did you have something you wanted to say before we
Just to thank everybody.
Yeah, well, Philip, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciated your insights on this. You've got a lot of experience on both sides of the desk, so that's been really helpful.
And the gray hair. I've been at it a long time.
All right, everyone. Well, next month in April, our guest author is going to be Erin Healy, and she's going to talk about writing coaches. What is a writing coach, and should I invest in one? So I think, again, that'll be another interesting topic, different than anything else that we've talked about previously on these sessions. So as always, second Tuesday of the month, and we hope to see you then. So goodbye for now. Thanks again, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks again, Philip.
Bye-bye. You're welcome.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.